The 2020 Cleveland Browns had a season to remember. They defied all odds, going 11-5, making the playoffs and even winning a playoff game under unusually difficult circumstances. They did all this with a first-year head coach who wasn't even able to have a normal offseason due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Not too many people outside of Cleveland saw this kind of season coming. So why don't we memorialize the stellar season by doing a season recap, briefly going over every single game, highlighting little tidbits along the way. Now, instead of doing the typical retrospective video that I normally do, this is going to be a much faster paced video, very reminiscent of Chris Berman's Fastest 3 Minutes. I'll save the full documentary about the 2020 Browns for 10 to 15 years from now. So without further ado, let's review the 2020 Cleveland Browns season. Week 1 had the Browns traveling to Baltimore. Kevin Stefanski called a questionable fake punt, and that pretty much summed up the entire game as the Browns would get routed 38-6. Lamar Jackson had a huge day. Week 2 was just a few days later on Thursday night as the Bengals came to town for round 1 of the Battle of Ohio. The Browns would get back on track as they appeared to find their rhythm on offense, and they would have a comfortable win over their in-state rival 35-30. A Baker Mayfield interception late in the game made it appear closer than it really was. In Week 3, the Washington football team came to town. The Browns jumped out to a 17-7 lead, but their offense stalled and allowed Washington to come back and take a 20-17 lead in the third quarter. But this is where the 2020 Cleveland Browns first showed us they were not the same old Browns. Cleveland came right back at Washington and finished the game scoring 17 unanswered points, winning by a final score of 34-20. In Week 4, Cleveland traveled to Dallas. The Browns put on an absolute clinic for 3 quarters and led 41-14 going into the fourth. This was looking like the most impressive Browns win since 1999. However, in an unbelievable turn of events, the Browns would watch their 27-point lead be cut all the way down to 3, and Browns fans everywhere were saying, "Here we go again." But once again, the 2020 Browns showed us they were not the same old Browns. At a critical moment, Cleveland pulled off a reverse to Odell Beckham Jr. that went 50 yards for a touchdown, and the Browns came out with a 49-38 victory. They also converted the most bizarre 2-point conversion of all time. Sadly, Nick Chubb suffered an MCL sprain and was sidelined for several weeks. In Week 5, the Indianapolis Colts came to town. Phillip Rivers would quite literally throw this game away with a pick 6 here and an intentional grounding safety here. Jarvis Landry would suffer broken ribs in the process, but the Browns prevailed 32-23, improving to 4-1 on the year. 4-1 was the team's best start since 1994, and 1994 was a reference point you would see a lot throughout the rest of this season. But Week 6 would be a humbling experience as the Browns traveled to their Temple of Doom, Heinz Field. Pittsburgh was by far the more physical team on this day as the Browns got punched right in the mouth and were humiliated 38-7. The Browns appeared to still have a long way to go, and calls for Baker Mayfield's head were at an all-time high, figuratively speaking. But Baker silenced just about every critic in Week 7. In round 2 of the Battle of Ohio, Baker exploded, throwing 5 touchdowns and throwing a franchise record 21 straight completions. The fourth quarter was very entertaining as both teams went back and forth trading the lead, but with 11 seconds left, Baker stepped up and hit Donovan Peoples-Jones on a 24-yard touchdown. The Browns improved to 5-2 in what was easily one of the most underrated games of 2020. Sadly, Odell Beckham Jr. was lost for the year on Cleveland's second play on offense. In Week 8, the Browns would return home in what would start a series of wacky weather games. The Raiders came to town and the two teams participated in what can kindly be described as a snooze fest. Jarvis Landry couldn't hold on to 2 touchdowns and the Raiders came out on top 16-6. Cody Parkey, who had been a bright spot so far, missed his first field goal of the season, mostly due to the weather. In Week 10, the Browns hosted the Houston Texans. The wind was swirling off of Lake Erie and as a result the score was just 10-7 late in the fourth. Nick Chubb, who by the way returned from injury, iced the game with a 59-yard run. It was here he would show us how selfless of a player he is by going out of bounds at the 1-yard line instead of going in for the score. What a guy. In Week 11, the Philadelphia Eagles came to town in what would conclude this trilogy of wacky weather games. Sione Takitaki had a pick 6, and Kareem Hunt made an acrobatic move for a touchdown while Wyatt Teller blocked 3 people at once. The Browns got the W 22-17. In Week 12, the Browns traveled to Jacksonville. Jarvis Landry's ribs appeared to finally be healed as he broke out with a huge game, having 8 receptions, 143 yards, and a touchdown. The game was a lot closer than you'd like against a team with 1 win, but the Browns got the W 27-25, improving to 8-3 on the season. Talk of making the playoffs was really starting to heat up at this point. Week 13 was arguably the biggest test of the year for the Browns. They were taking on the Titans, who were also 8-3, and this was going to determine whether or not the Browns were real contenders. Fortunately, the Browns proved they were indeed contenders. They attacked right out of the gate and led 38-7 at the half, grabbing the attention of the entire NFL in the process. A freak fumble by Baker Mayfield late in the game led to a Titans score, making the game appear much closer than it actually was. The Browns won 41-35, improving to 9-3 on the year. Week 14 was another big test, and it would turn out to be the game of the year. On a Monday night stage, the Browns and Ravens played in easily the best regular season game of the season. The Browns overcame two 14-point deficits and even took the lead in the fourth quarter. Lamar Jackson briefly left the game for unknown reasons, but came back just in time to throw a 44-yard touchdown to put the Ravens back on top. The Browns answered back, but they left too much time for the Ravens as Justin Tucker would drill the game winner with no time remaining. Well, I guess there was another play that ended in a safety, but who cares? In Week 15, the Browns traveled to the Meadowlands for a showdown on Sunday night. It was a rather boring game, but the Browns took care of business and won 20-6. It's worth noting that Cody Parkey had another doink. The Browns stayed right in the Meadowlands for Week 16 as they took on the New York Jets. However, Cleveland was severely undermanned in this one as they lost several key starters to COVID-19. Among those was Jarvis Landry. Losing all of those players turned out to be just too much as the Browns would lose to a one-win Jets team 23-16. Cleveland blew a chance to clinch a playoff spot, and flashbacks of Week 16 2007 at Cincinnati were in everyone's minds. But the Browns did have another shot to clinch a playoff spot in Week 17. They were taking on the Steelers, and luckily for the Browns, Pittsburgh was resting a lot of key starters. Mason Rudolph tried to make it close for the Steelers, but the Browns came away with the victory after a key run on third down by Baker Mayfield. With that, the Cleveland Browns clinched a playoff spot for the first time in 18 years. This was a truly special moment, and it's such a shame that the team was not able to share that moment with a full stadium of fans. But now to the postseason. The very next week, the Browns were once again taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers, only this time Pittsburgh starters would be playing, and this time it was at the House of Horrors, Heinz Field. Oh, and the Browns would be without their head coach Kevin Stefanski after he tested positive for COVID-19. But as Chris Berman says, this is why they play the games, and truer words have never been said. The first snap of the game went right over Ben Roethlisberger's head and resulted in a Browns touchdown. And just like that, the route was on. Big Ben threw interception after interception, and the Browns jumped all the way out to a 28-0 lead. It was over. The game did get a little dicey as the Browns got too conservative and allowed Pittsburgh to get somewhat back in the game, but a screen pass to Nick Chubb went 40 yards for the score and put the game away. The Browns had finally done it. Not only did they win a playoff game for the first time in 26 years, they ended their 17-game losing streak in Heinz Field. This was easily one of the biggest wins in franchise history. But the job was not done. The following week, the Browns had to travel to Kansas City to take on Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. The Browns came in big underdogs, so not many were surprised to see them trailing 19-3 at the half. However, the second half was much more entertaining as the Browns would hold the Chiefs to just 3 points. Unfortunately, the Browns would only score 14 points, which was not enough to make up for the point differential. Trailing 22-17 late in the fourth, the Browns were not able to stop the Chiefs on a key 4th and 1. And that was it. The Chiefs were headed to the AFC title game while the Browns were headed home. But there was absolutely nothing to be ashamed about. Sure, the Browns fell short of their ultimate team goal, but going 11-5 and winning a playoff game is still something to hold your head high about, especially given the recent history with the franchise. And that's a wrap on the 2020 Cleveland Browns season. You know, going back to that Chiefs game for a second, I think that game can be summed up in 2 words: missed opportunities. First, the game could have gotten out of hand at several points, but the Browns were fortunate enough to hold the Chiefs to field goals, and even a missed field goal at one point. For example, after Baker threw that interception deep in Browns territory, it looked like the Chiefs were going to score a touchdown and put the game away, but that wasn't the case, and all they got was a missed field goal. And you never wish injury upon anyone, but the Browns got a godsend when Patrick Mahomes had to leave the game. And later on, all the Browns had to do was stop Chad Henne on a 3rd and 15 and they would have got the ball back with a chance to win the game. They also didn't use Kareem Hunt enough in a revenge game. That was puzzling as well. So despite the Browns having an amazing season, the Chiefs game was definitely a big disappointment given everything I just laid out. Well guys, that's going to wrap up this video. I think this will be a new yearly video I do. I thought about doing one after last season, but by the time I came up with the idea, I felt like too much time had passed. Anyway, make sure to hit that subscribe button, make sure to follow me on Twitter, follow me on Twitch as well, and please consider supporting me on Patreon. All the links will be in the description. Until next time, I'm Ramen Robbie, and thanks for watching.